All righty. Well, happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to this week's Franchise Partner Spotlight webinar. If this is your first webinar that you're attending or listening to, this is something that we try to do on a weekly basis just to give anyone that's interested in ShelfGenie and our franchise opportunities a chance to hear from some of our different franchise owners, learn a little bit from their experience, and get some of their questions answered. So really good opportunity to learn more about ShelfGenie and the franchise business and what it really takes to be successful. So this week we're going to do it a little bit differently than we typically do. Normally I have the franchise owner that's on give a little bit of their background, talk about how they got into business ownership, why ShelfGenie was the franchise that they ended up selecting, and then just share some of their experience, what they've learned over the course of their time with ShelfGenie. This week, it's my distinct pleasure to have Kelly Barefoot. And if you're wondering, yes, this is my better half, or as Keisha would probably point out, my better three quarters. So Kelly's my wife. She and I own the ShelfGenie franchise in Wilmington, North Carolina, and Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We purchased the franchise, or I guess I should say we opened our franchise in June of 2018. And you can see a little bit of information here about Kelly. So as I said, we're going to do today's webinar a little bit differently. Kelly came on several months ago and did the webinar and, kind of went through the typical process, shared a little bit of her background, how we got involved with ShelfGenie and so forth. So, today we're going to really focus most of the conversation around local marketing and some of the things that Kelly's done here in our local market to really, as I would put it, go deeper into our market instead of going wide. And we'll explain more of what we mean as we get into the conversation today. So if you're interested to hear more about Kelly's background, you can go back and listen to the webinar that she recorded several months ago, or you can connect with her and I'll have her contact information on the last slide before we wrap up. But just a couple of quick things. You can see Kelly's a member of the FAC, which stands for Franchise Advisory Council. That's something that we have in place. There's 6 different franchise owners on the FAC. They're elected into that role by the other franchise owners. They meet on a weekly basis with the executive team in the home office. They're, very instrumental in anything new or strategic that we're looking at rolling out system-wide. And then you can see a few of the awards that Kelly's collected over our time with ShelfGenie. So, and I say Kelly because she really does run the day-to-day of our franchise business. I can take absolutely zero credit for any success that we've had to date or any future success that we have, and I know she'll agree with that. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and dive in. So as I mentioned, really want to focus the conversation today around going deep into your market. As in most businesses, there are several key variables that really determine how profitable your ShelfGenie franchise is going to be. And, I think one of the things that's very attractive to many people about the ShelfGenie business model is that it really is fairly simplistic. And what I mean by that is there aren't a whole lot of moving parts and pieces to the business. Simple does not necessarily mean easy, but it's simple in that there are really 2 or 3 key levers, as I would call it, that a franchise owner has the ability to pull on to drive better financial results. One of the biggest levers in our business is your marketing expense. As most people probably know, ShelfGenie is a home-based business model. We don't operate out of storefronts. We don't have showrooms. So it's important that we invest heavily in outbound marketing and advertising. And, so most ShelfGenie franchise owners are doing, some sort of digital marketing. They're doing traditional advertising like direct mail, or in some cases even newspaper ads. And, that's something that we definitely participate in our market as well. But, one of the biggest things that we've seen that can make a franchise owner's marketing more efficient for them in terms of a better ROI on their marketing dollars, as well as making their overall marketing spend a lower percentage of their revenue, which is one of the biggest things that's going to contribute to your bottom line. So one of the biggest things that we found is, really getting involved locally in your market, what I would kind of call more of a grassroots approach to marketing. So that's what we're going to focus the conversation around today. Some of the things that Kelly's implemented in our market, some of the things that we found to work really well, and then some of the things that have not worked out as well. So you can see here, what we mean by going deep into your market. It's really getting out and participating in local events in the market. So that could be home shows, that could be vendor fairs, expos, senior events. There's all types of opportunities to get out. In some cases, setting up a full home show display to exhibit the ShelfGenie solutions. In other cases, it may be a tabletop event, or you have a tent out at a festival, something of that nature. But just getting out in front of people, meeting them, talking to them about what we do, we found that to be a very, very good way to create new opportunities, or what we would call appointments. So with that, I'll stop rambling. And Kelly, do you want to just kind of start with like a high level overview of, what are some of the things that you've really been focusing on in our market from a kind of a local marketing standpoint?
Yeah, so we just realized when we got into the market that, there was only so much we could do as far as direct mail goes, as far as digital advertising. So we really started networking with other business owners, like businesses in our market, to find smaller, low-cost events that we could, exhibit at is a good way to say that. We found that this industry is definitely not as well known as maybe a closet industry or HVAC or any really other home service type industry. So we find that we do better when we talk to a potential client, explain what we do, be able to show what we do. They can touch and feel our home show display, and then say, hey, this is something I want in my house, versus getting a print marketing ad in the mail, and they're not really totally sure exactly what we do if they haven't heard of us before.
Yeah, exactly. And this is not anything that, Kelly and I have invented on our own. I mean, home shows, for example, you'd be hard pressed to find a ShelfGenie franchise owner that doesn't exhibit at the major home shows that take place in their market. But, those are going to be limited. The size of the market will, partially determine how many opportunities you have to exhibit at home shows. They're usually in the spring and the fall.
Right. So sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but like in our market, for instance, we have 2 home shows in the spring and 2 home shows in the fall. So we knew very early on that wasn't going to be enough, to keep our market where we want it throughout the entire year. So that's kind of when we started going a little bit deeper, finding other opportunities to exhibit at. Yeah,
and one thing that's probably worth circling back and noting is, so for Kelly and I's market, we have 2 territories. That's considerably less than what the average ShelfGenie franchise owner has. Average is about 5 or 6 territories. And then we have some franchise owners that have really scaled their business beyond that and have 10 or more territories. So coming into this, we knew that we had a smaller market share than most franchise owners. So these are things that we were really thinking about from day one. But I think everything we're going to talk about today is very applicable to any franchise owner in ShelfGenie, regardless the size of their market. What this is really going to, I hope, help people understand is how they can really maximize their marketing dollars, see a stronger ROI. And that's one of the biggest things you can do in this business to improve your bottom line. And we are going to talk some numbers today. So before we get into that, I do want to just make it very clear, like with any sort of an investment, there's no guarantee if you buy a ShelfGenie business, what type of return you'll see on that investment. There's no guarantee, that you would have a certain profit margin or better. Like in any business, it's really up to the business owner to execute and drive results. So, you'll get to see some of the numbers that our business has put up to date. But again, that's no guarantee of anything. We have franchise owners that perform significantly better than we do. We have franchise owners that probably are not performing quite as well either. What I really want to focus on today is, the ROI that we're getting from some of these events. And, so we talk about home shows. And again, home shows are a staple across the ShelfGenie system. If you've looked at our franchise disclosure document, you'll see that it's required that every franchise owner invest in a home show display. And we have some pictures of our display that we'll show as we go through the slide deck today. The home shows are usually kind of a more expensive, much larger event. You're usually going to have a higher amount of traffic coming through. So we'll talk about home shows, but really want to talk even more about some of the smaller events that aren't driving as much traffic, but they can also be incredibly inexpensive to do with a lot more upside. So that's what we'll kind of talk about. Do you want to, Kelly, just maybe kind of hit on each of these bullet points and give some examples of some of the different types of events that we've found and participated in so far?
Yeah, let's do that as we go through the slides. I can kind of talk about what the different types of events are. If that
Okay, sure. Yeah, so we'll start off with home shows. And I realize that the charts may be a little bit small and difficult for people to see. So I can help kind of point out some of the key information, but talk a little bit, Kelly, about, the shows that we've participated in and just the strategy that we've used going into it, because, you'll see here, we've had very good results from most of the larger home shows that we've done. So, the show itself is not going to make or break, a franchise owner and how they perform from it. It's really, how you approach the show and I think the strategy that you have going into it as well.
Yeah, so one thing that we do in our home shows, and I haven't attended other locations' home shows, and I don't know how they run it, but this is just one thing that we do. Our booth is very energetic. We make sure that we have minimum 4 booth workers at a time, usually more like 5, maybe even more, depending on how much traffic we have coming through at that time. And we kind of have our booth workers stationed throughout various places. We may have somebody standing kind of, if you look to the left of the sink, kind of standing outside, still on our floor, but just kind of outside a little bit, seeing if you can catch some traffic walking by. Our whole goal at the booth is to book appointments. So we're not pre-qualifying. We are just booking appointments. I will put any of my designers up against, once they get in the house, that's their job to sell it. It's not the booth worker's job to determine if that person is willing to or would like ShelfGenie in their house, willing to move forward with it. So that's kind of how we work our home shows. Like I said earlier, we do 2 Wilmington home shows and 2 Myrtle Beach home shows, one in the spring and one in the fall in each location. As you can see on the left-hand side, the Myrtle Beach home show is it's the one in the center, the Horry County Spring Show. It's a significantly larger home show with much more foot traffic. But I think one thing to just kind of point out is if you look under the cost per lead and cost per appointment columns, what it's costing us to get in the house is significantly less than what it costs us to get in the house with some print, mail advertising or even digital. And then even the conversion on those is pretty good. And then you look at the ROI. So every dollar we spend for that Myrtle Beach home show, we made $25. So that is really a significant number.
Yeah, and just for some perspective, so this cost per appointment, and for anyone that's wondering, these screenshots are from a report that every franchise owner has access to through their Wish Portal system. We call this the Marketing ROI report, and it kind of breaks down by marketing vehicle, including different shows that we've participated in, how much you spent on the show, the number of leads that were generated from the show, so then you have a cost per lead. Out of those leads, it'll tell you the number of those leads that converted into an appointment, giving you a cost per appointment. From there, you can see the number of those appointments that resulted in a sell, the average sell amount from those appointments, and then a total revenue number coming from those sells, and that's how the ROI is calculated. So for perspective, a 61 or call it a $62 cost per appointment, comparatively speaking, through direct mail or even, a lot of the digital advertising that we do, you're typically going to see somewhere between $300 to $400 cost per appointment. And in some cases, it could be even higher than that. So you can see through those numbers that this is a significantly lower cost per appointment than what we're getting through a lot of the other marketing vehicles. And it doesn't mean that those other marketing vehicles are not effective and that, we shouldn't be doing them. We spend, pretty heavily on digital and direct mail. here in our market. That's a big part of our marketing strategy. What we really want to get across today is the fact that you want to have a very comprehensive marketing strategy. You don't want to have all of your eggs in one basket. And, getting out, meeting people face to face, like in most businesses, is one of the best ways that you can generate interest and, drive more leads for the business. So, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think you hit on that. I think one thing that I would point out about home shows, at least this is what we see in our market, we have very good success, as you can see. I mean, 72 appointments from a 3-day show is a great number of appointments. But what you will see is you do have some of those people, because we aren't pre-qualifying. You get out there and they're just kind of curious. So we did see that our close rate went down a little bit, but we're still making, a significant return on our investment. For what we're investing and what the ROI comes out to. So for us, it's worth it to maybe take the close rate down a little bit, because number one, I mean, our cost per appointment is like a third of what it typically is. So that's kind of one thing I just wanted to point out.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. And, I would say, being candid, 72 appointments from a 3-day show, most franchise owners would probably, look at that and say, wow, that's a large number. I mean, I've heard franchise owners with, less than half of that number from a 3-day show. So I think a lot of that does come back to what Kelly mentioned, which is you got to make sure your booth is energetic. I mean, you can see our booth here. This is a 10 by 20 home show display, which is what I would certainly recommend. You're not required to do a 10 by 20, but I would recommend having one that's large enough. We can really showcase a lot of the different solutions that we provide here at ShelfGenie. Notice there's no seating, right? We're not sitting down. Our booth workers are not sitting down. They're not looking at their phones. They're standing out. They're wanting to greet people. And one of the things I know I was pleasantly surprised with when we did our very first home show, because I'd done home shows and trade shows for other businesses I've been involved in. With ShelfGenie, it's a very aesthetic product, right? It catches people's eye. When people see it, they're kind of drawn into the booth. And we tend to always have a large crowd. That's why, as Kelly said, we found for us, minimum 4 booth workers at a time is what we need. It's not the type of thing where you're having to kind of like awkwardly drag people into the booth and convince them to talk to you. This is something that really does catch people's attention, and they want to, come in and learn more about what we do. And the goal is 100% to book an appointment at the show. You'll get some people that, they're interested. Maybe they take a brochure. They, want us to follow up. So we do come away from home shows usually with, as you can see here, 72 appointments. In addition to that, we had a list of leads where we had, names and contact information for people that were not necessarily ready to book an appointment right then and there, but they wanted us to follow up with them. In that case, we can upload those leads to our call center, and they'll do the outbound calls and the follow-up to try to then convert those leads to appointments. And you can kind of follow this down and see that, yeah, the majority of the sales from the show came the same month as the show, but we definitely had sales, in some cases 6 months down the road. So those leads that you can generate at a show are definitely worth following up with. And the call center that we have is a fantastic resource to take that off of the franchise owner's plate and kind of handle that piece for you.
I think, even going one step further, I think a way that you can, convert some of those leads to appointments on your own, as well as we use MailChimp, and we do kind of a drip email campaign to people that leave their emails with us that did not book an appointment. We send them a digital copy of our solutions catalog, which is just a lookbook of a bunch of pictures. We offer them another offer to go ahead and book, and that those emails would come right back to me. So that's another way to just kind of stay in front of them, not just by calling.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what our home show special is? One of the things we do to try to incentivize them to book while they're there at the show?
Yeah. So, and I know this is different across the system, but this is what we offer. We always offer free installation if they book in the booth. We will not honor free installation if the appointment was not booked when they're standing in the booth. So that's kind of their incentive. If you're thinking about ever having ShelfGenie, this is the time to do it. This is the best special that we will do all year. And, if you call in a week because you decided you wanted to, we can't offer the free installation. And I think that's how we get a lot of people to convert in the booth.
Yeah, but important to point out that that's up to each franchise owner. You don't have to have an offer. You can make the offer or the incentive whatever you want it to be. That's what we've found to work well for us. So,
well, I mean, the nice thing is you can give a little bit steeper of a discount because you're not paying as much to be in the home. Your cost
right.
of appointment is so much lower. So you can give a 10% or whatever your installation is set at. You can give a bigger discount than you typically would because you still are turning an ROI of 25 or whatever it is. Much higher than you turn in other areas.
Yeah, and again, I mean, look, you can see here at the bottom one, not every single home show is going to produce a 25 ROI. I don't want to, make it sound like this is guaranteed if you do a home show and it's just going to kind of fall into your lap. I mean, you got to work it. You got to bring the energy. You got to have a strategy going into it. You want to make sure that your booth is set up well and looks good. But, we've done shows that, still decent ROI, but not anywhere near that. The important thing to understand is if you're not incorporating these type of things into your marketing strategy, you're going to miss the opportunity altogether. And again, home shows, there may be a handful of franchise owners that for one reason or another don't really do the home shows. But other than that, as you start talking to other franchise owners, you'll see that, most are participating in the large home shows that take place in their markets throughout the year. And in the discovery portal that you all have access to, there is a whole section dedicated to home show displays where you can read a little bit more about our strategy for home shows. You can see some pictures, and there's even a pretty cool video that one of our franchise owners did, kind of giving you a tour of his home show display. So I don't want to spend too much of our time on home shows because that is kind of more mainstream throughout ShelfGenie, I guess you could say. So let's talk about some of the other, what I would just classify as smaller events that at surface level may look less attractive than, a home show that's bringing thousands of people through. So, expos can mean a lot of different things. I'll let Kelly give some examples of, some of the different expos that we've done. But, this can be a really, really good opportunity, usually very inexpensive to participate in with a ton of upside.
Yeah, so I mean, in expos, festivals, all of it kind of plays in together, but we've just tried to break this up just to make it kind of easier to understand. But so for instance, the Life Expo was a senior type living expo. It was a one-day event. We just had a tabletop display with some banners, signage. We had a TV with a slideshow, and then just our standard demo kit that we bring into the house. So there's not all the setup that you have with a home show. Even with booth workers and everything, our all-in cost was $800. Which is, significantly low. And then if you look over to the far right, our ROI again was over 20. So it was a one day, time investment. The setup was probably an hour. And, it turned and proved to be very good. Obviously it was more of our target demographic. I'm trying to think other vendors. We were the only home service vendor at this event. There was the hospital was there. They had chiropractors. They had some retirement communities. They had some speakers, that kind of thing. But we were the only home service. And I actually got a little bit of pushback from this show when I wanted to sign up because they had never had somebody like us. And I was like, well, let us just try it. Like, I'm not going to hold it to you guys. And look, I mean, we got 25 leads and 9 appointments, which converted to, almost $17,000 in sales. So it was definitely worth our time. The Coastal Living Show was put on by a women's group in our area. Again, just another one-day Saturday in March show. And again, you can see it ended up turning a pretty good ROI. We didn't book a ton of appointments, but the people that did book, they were buyers. And again, it was worth our time to do that one. For that booth, we set up our 2 corners from our home show display. So again, our setup, I mean, we just set up on Saturday morning versus having to go the day before like you would with a home show. So that was really nice. You had mostly women at that show because it was put on by a local women's group. And then the Coastal Consumer Showcase is an event that is put on by one of our Chamber of Commerce. And so there was a slew of different types of vendors there, very small booth spaces. And again, we just did the same thing we did for the Life Expo, set up a tabletop. I had one booth worker out there, all in, we were $450, and that included our giveaway. So, I mean, obviously that one didn't produce as much revenue, but it was still, worth our time to do it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. You look at this Coastal Consumer Show, and literally we generated 2 appointments and had 1 sell from it. And you might kind of think, well, is that really worth the effort? But when you look at it in terms of ROI, it's absolutely worth the effort. And so, you sprinkle enough of these in throughout your year, and not only does it add a considerable amount of revenue, but it's really going to strengthen your bottom line, because what it's doing all along the way is reducing that overall percentage of your revenue that your marketing spend is. So that's, I think, really important. And I think it's why, some franchise owners maybe, just haven't been willing to invest the money or the time in some of these smaller shows. Is like, well, is it really going to be worth my time? And our opinion is that it absolutely is. And you're going to find some that are losers, right? I mean, we've done, some shows that we tried it and we won't do them again based on the results, but, you have to be willing to try it. You have to be willing to maybe think outside of the box. In some cases, we'll talk about, some of the festivals that we've done here in just a minute. And I mean, I remember when Kelly was bringing some of these ideas to the table, and I was like, really, you think that makes sense for us to be at? And I can't believe I'm going to say this on recording, but she was right. In some cases, at least. So, and another important thing to point out, I think you mentioned this, but, for some of these smaller events, a lot of times they're one day, sometimes it's even, 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon. A lot of times that's not going to warrant, coming in and setting up your full display, wherever they're hosting the expo may not, you may not have enough room to do that, or just from a time standpoint, it may not be worth it. So, some of these smaller events, we're literally working off of, a tabletop where we've got, maybe a pop-up banner, ShelfGenie tablecloth. We've got our demo kits out there and some marketing material. These type of events, you're typically not going to have your full home show display set up at.
Yep. I think a good point Wes made is, this was kind of our year of learning. We pretty much, anytime I could find somewhere where we could be, we were. We are in the process of looking to hire somebody else, but for part of the year, we did have a marketing person who her essential job was to find, set up, and do these smaller shows. So, and I think that was very helpful, just having somebody focusing on this full time.
Yeah, agreed. And we'll talk in a minute about some of the different ways that you can, find different events to, consider participating in, because a lot of times like a Google search isn't necessarily going to, get you all of the different opportunities that are out there. We've been pretty, surprised at some of the events that come onto our radar one way or another, but, before that we weren't aware of it. I
mean, just yesterday, for instance, because we do so many shows, yesterday I had a call from a senior expo that's in December, asking us to participate. So I think the more that you do and people know that you like to, be a vendor at various shows, you'll start getting calls too.
Yeah. And so, David, that's a very good question. Yes, anything that you're spending, towards an event like we're talking about, that would go towards your, marketing expense and the marketing minimums that you have each month. We do have, the minimums that you need to spend a certain amount, or at least average a certain amount per month towards marketing and advertising. But beyond that, ShelfGenie doesn't dictate where or how you're spending that money. If it's spent really in any way, to market or promote the business, that goes towards those minimums. So
that's and I would say that majority of our marketing spend is towards events. We do a couple direct mail pieces. We do some digital, but that's pretty much what we're spending our money on. We've just found the results are better. And, we have the opportunity to talk to people who maybe, like I said, would, see an ad in the mail and throw it out.
Yeah, exactly. And that might be a bit counterintuitive for, what some of our franchise owners do. I mean, part of that is we are in a smaller market, so we simply don't have as many paid marketing vehicles available to us. The one direct mail that we have for us, it's Valpak. I think since we opened, we have over a 10 ROI from Valpak. So that produces very well for us. We spend the maximum amount that we can every month on Valpak. So it's not that those other things don't work and can't work. In some cases, the market that you're in is somewhat going to dictate, what your marketing strategy looks like. But, the point that I really want to get across through this webinar today is that regardless of the market that you're in, how large or how small it is, participating in these events should be a key part of your comprehensive marketing strategy. And one other thing, because Kelly talked about, we did hire and we're in the process of looking for a replacement, but, someone to kind of spearhead this for us. Because, I know I talk to people as they work through this process and they're like, well, Wes, this all makes sense, but like, I don't want to spend every weekend out, at an event or something like that. Neither do we. We have a 3-year-old daughter. We have, lives outside of business. Part of why we got into business ownership was for, a little more flexibility, quality of life. I'll be honest, this first year and a half or so, Kelly and I have been at just about every event that we've done. But, the long-term strategy is definitely to build out a team that can execute these events, even if we're not there. But, even this past fall, we had weekends where we had 2 or 3 different events going on, at the same time, overlapping. And so, that's kind of really forced us to start laying the groundwork to, have a team. But, I think like anything, when you're first getting into it, from an owner standpoint, you need to be involved so you can see it firsthand. You can learn how it works. You can kind of become the expert. It's going to put you in a better position to, train your team going forward. But I definitely agree, we're not looking to spend every single weekend, out at an event or something of that nature. We're, looking at this long term that we're going to have a team that can really execute all of this for us.
Yeah. And I think going back to the, you need to be involved at the beginning. I don't know that as an owner, you really ever can step back from the big home shows. Completely. You don't have to be there, that as soon as the door opens until the show closes for 3 days. But during the busy time, I think it makes a huge difference to have somebody from ownership in the booth. We walk around these expos and you see, people leaving early and everything. And you across the board hear that it's just an employee working the booth, and you just don't get as good of results.
And we found that the home shows, the expos, I mean, really any of the types of events that we're talking about today, they're really good networking opportunities. So in addition to talking to prospective clients, you can get out there and meet the other vendors, meet the other business owners. I mean, that's one way that we found out about some of these events that weren't already on our radar. You talk to the, CertaPro painter 2 aisles down. Hey, what other events are you doing? What have you found that works well for you and what hasn't? Great way to, set up some potential referral partnerships. I mean, we do some of these home shows and have builders and remodelers come in and ask us about what we do. And we've set up some referral partnerships as a result. So that's another important reason, I think, for an owner to, stay close to the bigger events, especially because it will present a really good networking opportunity as well. All right. So this is where Kelly started thinking a little bit outside of the box this fall. And I'll point out quickly the picture that you see in the top right-hand corner here. This is the ShelfGenie mobile display, which is pretty cool. And I should have thought to put a picture of the actual inside of this. So we own our home show display, the picture you saw in one of the earlier slides. The mobile display is actually owned by the home office. It's something that they invested in earlier this year, kind of as a pilot program. So basically, it's an old food truck. And in the back of it, there are counter cabinets with countertops and ShelfGenie solutions, just like you would see in our home show display. And it's set up so that someone can actually step into the back of the truck and, put their hands on the products and see them and feel them and really get a sense of, how these solutions work, just like they would at a home show. It's just mobile. So we were able to use this. We actually rented it from the home office for the month of October, took it around to some different events, and saw some pretty good results. So you want to talk about some of the festivals that we did and how we found them and what type of results we saw?
Yeah, so Riverfest is a big street festival in downtown Wilmington. Last year, before I kind of started getting these ideas to do kind of more shows than just home shows, we looked at it and I just decided, that it probably wasn't a good fit. Well, it turns out it was a good fit. So this year like Wes said, this is actually a picture from the Riverfest, the mobile display at the Riverfest. So we just set up the mobile display. We had a table, and that was it. I mean, we were set up in 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And it was really cool because, first of all, you've got a billboard there that people would stop by and look at. And then we had tons of traffic inside the mobile display. So it was really nice for people to not just be able to see pictures, but actually touch and feel just like at a home show without having to set up the whole booth. So that was the Riverfest. Shrimp Fest was down towards Myrtle Beach. It is a shrimp fest, all different kinds of shrimp and seafood out on the Riverwalk. We still have some appointments to run from this show, so we'll see kind of what the overall ROI turns out to be, but it's looking like it's pretty good. This had a lot more traffic, I would say, than the Riverfest did, but it was a different crowd. You had a lot of people drinking beer and eating shrimp. So the difference in that show, we had if you see the bottom setup, we had a setup more similar to that with the tent and table. And that was actually kind of cool though, because the people that did walk into our booth had probably seen us somewhere else, and so it was a nice little kind of circle. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat.
Yeah, you guys may want to avoid the Shrimp Fest then.
Oh, well, yeah. Sorry, I didn't even see that.
David's chat said, unfortunately, his wife's highly allergic to shellfish, so maybe that's where you hire a booth worker for that one.
Hire a booth worker for that one. But I did think it was cool because it was not too far after our home show season, so we were able to see people that we saw in the home show booth. They came back and they booked at the show. So just goes to show, they didn't pick up the flyer and call. They came back by to book, which was nice. And then Leland Founders Day is something that our old marketing person found very low cost. As you can see, that cost there includes her pay. We didn't do a ton in sales. We had one sale. It still turned an okay ROI. We didn't lose money on it. But yeah, that was kind of I don't know, they had a couple food trucks, couple vendors type event.
Yeah, and again, that's one that maybe we do it next year, maybe we don't, but we tried it and now we know. And through some of these expos and festivals and some of these smaller events, one of them's probably not going to make or break your business, right? I mean, take the Shrimp Fest, for example. I mean, $4,000, just under $4,000 sell, right? That's not going to make or break us, but, from an ROI standpoint, good. So, really what I want to reiterate is that these type of events should be just a consistent part of your strategy. And obviously these specific ones that we're talking about are specific to our market. But every market is going to have these type of events. And I would really argue that the larger the market, the more opportunity there is. If you're not in...
Sorry. And I think if you look over like at Shrimp Fest, for instance, I mean, the cost that it costs us to do a 2-day festival and talk to hundreds of people, I mean, it's probably close to what some people pay for one appointment through some of their paid marketing. So.
Well, that's a really good point, and it's I think worth talking about for a minute or two. The reporting's good. I mean, you can see here, this is a report that we can very easily run. There's the information that's in this marketing ROI report is invaluable to have, but the attribution is not a perfect science, right? So my guess would be through many of these events that we did, we've gotten leads and appointments that were not necessarily attributed to the events themselves, but people saw us there. We got on their radar. It kind of, sparked the light bulb with them and they wanted to learn more. So maybe they went home and, did a Google search and did some more research online, and then they filled out the form online to book an appointment, in which case that's not going to show up in the reporting for the actual event. It's going to show up as an appointment for, our website or our digital marketing. We do a lot of direct mail. We'll have, an appointment that shows up in the report, as a Valpak appointment. And then the designer gets out there and they say, hey, yeah, I saw you at the home show last spring. I've kind of been thinking about it. And then I got this mailer and I decided to go ahead and call. So the reporting's not perfect. It's very good, but it's never going to be a perfect science. So, just getting out in front of people, creating that exposure, you're going to plant the seed. And then, whether they book at the event a week later or 6 months down the road, what you're really looking for is to get designers in the home.
I think too, again, it just goes back to how you work these different shows. I think if you plan to set up a table and put a chair behind the table and just sit there, you're probably going to see that it doesn't yield the results that you want. I think if you actually go and work the booth, don't just sit at the booth, you'll find that you have much better results.
Yeah, and I wasn't even really planning to talk about this, but you also kind of cater to the audience that's there, right? I mean, for Riverfest, I don't know if you can see me, but, we had ShelfGenie t-shirts and I was wearing a hat. I wouldn't wear that at a home show. It wouldn't be appropriate. But, if you're dressed kind of stiff looking at, a festival where people are walking around eating food from food trucks and drinking beer, you're going to be less approachable. So you want to kind of think about that, understand who your audience is. At Shrimp Fest, I'm proud to say I was a man of the people. I was drinking beer and eating shrimp. I fit right in, but I'd like to think that made me more approachable, right? So
I was the main booth worker there. Let's just put that on record.
I'm the muscle. I'm there for setup and breakdown.
Yeah.
Hey, and I don't have a slide for this, but can you talk a little bit about the one-stop home shop that we've participated in?
Yeah, so the One Stop Home Shop is a mini home show in a 55 up community that's very big for us. And a closet company put it on for a couple times that we did it. And they weren't going to put it on this fall. So I called and said, well, can we put it on? And they ended up doing it with us. But we actually, through all the vendors that we secured, so there was a lot of work on the front end for me, but through all the vendors that we secured, we ended up making money on the show, not a ton, but it didn't cost us anything to be there. And so we actually had the mobile display out front of the building, and then we had a tabletop set up inside. And again, the traffic's not like it is at a home show or anything like that. It's a lot slower, but the people that do come are, interested in the vendors that are there, because we heavily promote the vendors that are going to be there. So that always yields a really good result for us.
Well, and it's also a very targeted audience, right? These are people that live in a 55 and up retirement community, which is kind of our bread and butter from a demographic standpoint. Doesn't mean that we only sell to people in that demographic, but so less traffic, yes, but a very targeted audience that we know is much more likely to have an interest, as well as the wherewithal or the means to purchase from us. So
yeah, and when we used to just participate in the One Stop Home Shop, it was $150 vendor booth. And you went and set up for like 3 or 4 hours, and you could book probably 5 to 10 appointments. And we always have done very well at that show. So that's just something to keep in mind. If there isn't these opportunities, you could always get in a networking group, find a couple other vendors and put one on yourself.
That's right. If the opportunities aren't there, just go out and create them. So before we kind of wrap this up, do you want to talk a little bit more about how we have found some of these events? And also it's probably worth talking about, because I think it really goes hand in hand with, the events, is, what are some of the other networking activities that you're doing, some of the groups that you're in? Maybe hit on some of that quickly.
Yeah, so we find the shows in a couple different ways. Well, actually a bunch of different ways. The first I've already talked about, by being at other shows. That's really how we found a lot of them. We found through the Home Builders Association, doing networking with them. That's actually how we found out about the One Stop Home Shop that now we put on. Facebook is really good. If you go on their Facebook events, like the Facebook events page. You can kind of search local events and just kind of look through that. If you hear of an event somewhere, like for instance, a Christmas show or something that may not be a good fit for you, look at that venue and see what else they have coming up. I know I'm always checking the convention center websites just to see what kind of show they're bringing on. Like for instance, this year they're doing a boat and RV show in January at the convention center where our home show's at. That we're participating in. So I think just kind of being proactive. And then a lot of the different chambers, like the Shrimp Fest is put on by the Little River, South Carolina Chamber of Commerce. A lot of them put on their own events. And so if you can, find areas that are big for your business and follow their chamber, get on their mailing list, and you'll start seeing events come through that way as well. And then I kind of touched on the networking. Back to the chambers, some chambers will have free networking groups if you're a member. The one that I participate in passes about $1 million in referrals a year. It's free to go. You can talk about your business. You always have to be specific in the kind of referrals you're asking for, but it's proven to be pretty good for us. Home Builders Associations is really good. And then just from the home shows, meeting different closet companies, cabinet companies, refacers, that kind of thing that can refer business to you, and then you can refer business as well. I think one thing that gets lost on people as far as referral partnerships goes is you just want people to send you business, but you're not going to get a lot of business if you don't send business to them. So find somebody that you trust to send your clients to, and make sure that your clients share, like give your business card and say, make sure you give this to them so that they know that it's ShelfGenie, sending the business that way, so that they think about you to send business as well.
Yeah, good points. And then, also like, I think it was just yesterday, you got contacted by someone that's putting on another senior event that we're going to do. I think once you start getting involved, then you start showing up on lists and, people will reach out to you. And doesn't mean every time someone contacts you, it's going to be an event worth doing. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had no idea about this event and it's literally in a couple of weeks. So, that's a great opportunity.
I'm pretty on top of, when we used to have our marketing person, she was, that was her job. So we knew about pretty much everything. And then we kind of picked and choose what made sense and what didn't. And then I just try to at least every day, just for a couple minutes, just see if there's anything that pops up on community calendars, things like that. But this one I hadn't even heard of. So it's at a local YMCA and it's a half a day senior expo. So,
yeah. So I think the theme there would be proactive with it, right? I mean, you've got to be thinking about this as a part of your marketing strategy year round. And I mean, depending on the market that you're in, you're going to have certain times of the year where there's more going on than others. But, you can probably find a minimum of one event to do per month, pretty much year round, at a very minimum.
I think one more thing to just kind of point out, if you look at these marketing ROI reports, I guess to the left of cost per appointment, including designer canceled. So you look on that left-hand side, that's how did the show perform, right? Like what did we spend on the show? How many leads did we get? How many appointments did we get? And what did it cost? If you look on the right of that cost per appointment, including designer canceled, that's how did your designers perform?
Right.
So, if you look and see, okay, we booked a lot of appointments, but maybe our revenue per appointment was low, our number of sales was low, our revenue or ROI is low. Is it because the show was bad, or did you just not have the right people going into the home? And I think that's a whole nother conversation. You can have me back for another hour. I'll talk about it. But I think that's something.
You should sign her up for next week.
I think that's just something to kind of keep in mind, is that just because it maybe shows a low ROI doesn't mean that there was a bad show. It could just be not great performance from your salespeople.
Well, that's a very good point. And, it's worth noting in general with the whole conversation of marketing, right? I mean, that's just the first half of the equation, right? The second half of the equation is, how does your team perform with the opportunities that your marketing's created? I mean, theoretically, you could have the most cost-effective marketing strategy ShelfGenie's ever seen, and you could still lose money, right? I mean, if you don't close any of the appointments, then you're still going to be at a loss, even if you had a $5 cost per appointment. So
yeah, and that's something, when I talk to candidates during validation calls, or, a new franchise owner comes on and they're like, I want to do all these shows. I'm like, focus on, the first things first is have the team that can handle the appointments, because that's
right.
another thing. I mean, once somebody has an appointment and they don't buy, that's a lost opportunity. So, maybe what we did, I mean, we didn't really start doing a ton of events right off the bat. I wanted to make sure that we had a team that could close, and we knew what we were doing, so that when we did get an influx of appointments, we could make money from them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good point is, first and foremost, you have to lay the foundation. It doesn't mean you have to have your team, fully built out. I mean, I know Kelly will agree with me. I mean, your team, especially with your designers, it's always a work in progress. I mean, you don't wake up one day and say, all right, the team's perfect. They can't get any better. There's no room for improvement. You're always going to be working to expand your team and then, help your existing team get better. But, you probably as a brand new franchise owner don't want to line up, 20 shows for the year before you even have one designer or before, you've proven that you can be a competent designer yourself. But, all in all, this is, I think it has to be, a key component of your marketing strategy, and not the only one, right? I mean, there's digital marketing. I mean, you've got to be investing in digital marketing in this day and age. It's counterintuitive for a lot of people, but, we've talked about direct mail. Some of the more traditional forms of advertising are still very effective in this particular business. Yeah. So that's an example of what clients get from us. And, we don't do it in our market. We've tried it. It didn't really make sense for us, but especially in some of the larger metro markets, most franchise owners are still running ads in the newspaper, which a lot of people are shocked to hear, but, the ROI doesn't lie, right? I mean, if the ROI is there, why not?
Right.
So, and David brought up the question earlier about marketing minimums that, that tends to, scare some people when they first read that as, wow, I'm required to spend a certain amount in marketing each month. And, I would just point out that, number one, never look at your marketing dollars as an expense. They're an investment, right? So it all comes back to what is that ROI? And as we talked about earlier, the attribution's not perfect. So you don't want to get too terribly caught up in looking at, marketing vehicle by marketing vehicle, what your ROI is. It's good information to have, but you can also make bad decisions with your future marketing investments looking only at that. So you really want to focus on the bottom line. And that's what you see on the screen here. This is year to date through October for our business. You can see the total amount that we've invested in marketing and advertising. And it comes to an 8.2 ROI, which I think most franchise partners would be extremely satisfied with. We're at about 12% of revenue for our marketing spend. So, we can go through and we can look at each individual marketing vehicle, and, some of them will be clear losers, and you say, all right, this is not something that we'll invest in going forward. Some of them you have to understand are not necessarily going to drive as many appointments that can be directly attributed back to it. But it's creating awareness. It's getting the brand out there. It's getting on people's radar, and then they get to us in other ways. So we really try to focus primarily on the overall ROI that we're getting. And so, look, our philosophy has been, if the ROI is there, we'll keep investing, right? I mean, in our first year of business, we were required to spend a minimum of $5,000 per month in marketing and advertising. We probably averaged closer to $7,000 a month, not because anyone was telling us that we had to, but because it made sense and the ROI was there.
Yeah, I think it's actually, I mean, that number sounds a little bit scary at first, but it's hard to not hit that number. And I think that if you're not coming close to that number, you're not going to have the appointments that you need to generate the revenue that you need to have a successful business. So like, as Wes said, we don't look at that $74,000, almost $75,000 we've spent year to date as an expense. It's an investment in our business. And without that, there's no way for us to make any kind of money.
Yep. And so, you can see here our cost per appointment for the year is about $205. This is one that really ranges. David, you and I will do a call at some point, and this is something that I do with every candidate where we have a pro forma that we review. And I always recommend when you get into the stage of the discovery process where you're having some one-on-one calls with other franchise owners, we call that validation. Ask each franchise owner what their cost per appointment is. But in some markets, you'll hear, $350, $420. You'll hear some markets where, their cost per appointment is over $500. And some of that is, dictated by the market. In some places, it simply is more expensive to advertise. You can also likely charge more for your products in those markets. But, I think if you're in a market where it is expensive to advertise, that makes it all the more important, that you're incorporating, what I would call this grassroots approach to marketing, consistently throughout the year. And, this is something that I'm really trying to stress with candidates as they work through the process with me, because I know for a fact that, many of our franchise owners over the years haven't focused enough on this, and it has a big impact on your bottom line. You'll see when we go through the pro forma review, this cost per appointment number is one of the single biggest levers in this business. And ShelfGenie is no different than any business or any organization. We have a bell curve, right? We've got our top performers, our underperformers, everyone in between. Focusing on these key metrics and making sure that you're proactively taking the action that you need to have these metrics in line and where they should be. It's one of the biggest things that separates the top performers in this business from, middle of the road or even underperformers. So, I hope that this was helpful. The last thing I'll kind of add, and then we'll open it up for some questions. But if you have a little, 2-year-old daughter that you can throw in a ShelfGenie shirt and, kind of use her as a mascot, that definitely doesn't hurt. However, it's not necessary.
Let's just be honest. She's the reason that we had 365 appointments.
Yeah, maybe. So if you don't have a 2-year-old daughter, maybe factor adopting a 2-year-old into your
Ours is for rent. Ours is for rent.
That's a good idea. We can do that. All kidding aside, though, I hope that this was helpful. I know this is something that, because from day one when we started our business, this wasn't necessarily as much on our radar as it is now. So this is something that we've kind of learned. So anyways, I hope this was helpful. Let me get you unmuted here, David. Any questions or anything that you'd like us to clarify or expand on?
No, very thorough, and I appreciate all the information. It's great.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that, for you, David, we've only had, one call. So, some of this may be a bit out of context, but as we work through, the next call that we have, and especially as we work through the pro forma exercise that I mentioned earlier, a lot of this will make more sense, I think. So, but really appreciate you taking the time to call in today. For anyone that's listening in after the fact, we appreciate it. If you'd like to connect with Kelly and talk to her one-on-one, you can connect with her on LinkedIn. Let me just move this. I want to make sure it's not blocking. And then her email address is kbarefoot@shelfgenie.com. Feel free to shoot her an email, and she'd be happy to talk with you in more detail about any of this or anything else ShelfGenie related. So if there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We will not be doing a webinar next week because, believe it or not, I couldn't get anyone to come on Thanksgiving Day and do this with me. So we'll be taking the week off next week. So hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving. You all know how to get in touch with me if you have any questions or if there's anything I can do to help. So thanks again, and hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you.